The highway stretched endlessly before him, a black ribbon slicing through the vast, unbroken wilderness. Liam tightened his grip on the steering wheel, his knuckles whitening under the dim glow of the dashboard lights. The rain had begun to taper off, leaving the road slick and gleaming under the silver light of a full moon. In the distance, the forest stood like silent sentinels, their gnarled limbs clawing at the edges of the sky. It was the kind of night that bred unease, the kind that made every shadow look alive and every whisper of the wind sound like a warning. Liam wasn't one to spook easily. Years spent living off the grid in his secluded cabin had hardened him against the strange noises of the wild. But tonight was different. A heaviness lingered in the air, an electric charge that made the hairs on his arms stand on end. He chalked it up to exhaustion. He had been running errands all day, and the isolation of the long drive was playing tricks on his mind. Or so he thought. The first hint of something unusual came as he rounded a sharp bend in the road. His headlights sliced through the darkness, illuminating the glistening asphalt ahead. And there it was, a shape crumpled and motionless lying just off the shoulder. Liam slowed the truck instinctively, his heart quickening. At first, he thought it was an animal, a deer maybe, struck by another driver who hadn't bothered to stop. But as he inched closer, the silhouette took on human contours. A figure, small and limp, lay half-shrouded in the mist rising from the rain-drenched ground. He killed the engine, the sudden silence amplifying the drumming of his pulse. For a moment, he simply sat there staring. Something about the scene was wrong. Sliding out of the truck, he grabbed a flashlight from the glove compartment. The beam of light cut through the fog as he approached, each step bringing him closer to a sight that would forever be etched into his memory. The figure was a woman, or at least she resembled one. She was curled on her side, her arms wrapped protectively around her torso as if shielding herself from the cold. Her skin, slick with rain, glowed faintly under the moonlight, a muted emerald hue that shimmered like the surface of a deep forest pool. Liam's breath caught in his throat. He froze, the flashlight trembling in his hand. This wasn't human. The realization struck him like a physical blow, a jarring disconnect between what he knew and what he saw. Her face, delicate and angular, was framed by a cascade of dark, damp hair. Her eyes were closed, her expression one of pain and exhaustion. And then there was the wound, a jagged gash across her side, oozing a bioluminescent liquid that pulsed with an eerie, rhythmic glow. "What the hell?" Liam whispered, his voice swallowed by the vast stillness around him. His first instinct was to back away, to leave her there, and pretend he'd seen nothing. But something stopped him, a faint, guttural sound, barely audible over the whisper of the wind. She was trying to speak. He crouched beside her, his hand hovering uncertainly over her shoulder. "Hey, can you hear me? Are you—" He caught himself. What was he even asking? Was she what? Her eyes fluttered open, and Liam felt a jolt of unease. Her irises were unlike anything he had ever seen, deep, luminescent pools that seemed to hold entire galaxies within them. They locked onto his with an intensity that pinned him in place. "Help. Me," she murmured, her voice strained and accented in a way he couldn't place. Panic warred with curiosity. His rational mind screamed at him to walk away, to drive back to his cabin, and forget any of this had ever happened. But his conscience, or perhaps some primal instinct he couldn't explain, refused to let him leave her there. With trembling hands, he slipped out of his jacket and draped it over her. The fabric seemed to absorb the faint glow of her skin, casting strange shadows on the ground. I'll get you somewhere safe," he said, more to himself than to her. The effort of moving her was monumental. She was lighter than she looked, but the dead weight of her unconscious form made every step feel like a trial. Her bioluminescent blood smeared across his arms and clothes, warm and unsettlingly vibrant. He tried not to think about it as he laid her in the passenger seat of his truck, her head lolling against the window. As he started the engine and pulled back onto the road, Liam couldn't shake the feeling that he had crossed an invisible line, one that separated the mundane from the extraordinary. The world he had known, his quiet life of solitude, felt irreversibly distant now, as though he had stepped into a story that wasn't his to tell. The figure beside him, still and otherworldly, was a living mystery, and mysteries he knew rarely came without consequences. The cabin wasn't far, 20 minutes at most, but every mile felt like an eternity. The air seemed to hum with unseen tension, the shadows outside his windows deeper and more restless than before. He glanced at her periodically, half expecting her to vanish like a mirage. But she remained, a stark, undeniable presence that defied everything he thought he understood about the world. As he pulled into the gravel driveway, Liam's mind raced with questions. Who, or what, was she? Where had she come from? And perhaps most troubling of all, what had happened to her? The answers he knew would come with time. But as he carried her into the cabin and laid her on the worn sofa, one thought eclipsed all others. He had made a choice tonight, one that could not be undone. And somehow, he knew it was only the beginning. Liam sat in the worn armchair by the fireplace, his thoughts tangled and restless. The cabin, usually his sanctuary, felt stiflingly small tonight. Every creak of the timber, every whistle of the wind outside seemed amplified, as if the walls themselves were straining to hold back the unknown. The woman, or alien, or whatever she was, lay motionless on the sofa, her breaths shallow but steady. He had wrapped her in the old quilt his grandmother had made, the faded pattern stark against the faint green shimmer of her skin. The glow had dimmed somewhat, but it was still there, casting an otherworldly hue over the room. His gaze kept returning to the gash along her side. He had done his best to clean the wound, using supplies from the first aid kit he kept under the sink. The bioluminescent liquid, her blood, had soaked into the gauze, radiating an unsettling, pulsing light. It wasn't just a wound, it was a story, written in a language he couldn't begin to decipher. Who was she? What had happened to her? And why, of all places, had she ended up here? The questions churned in his mind, each more unsettling than the last. But answers, if they came at all, would have to wait. For now she needed rest, and so did he, or so he thought. The first sign of trouble came in the form of a sound, distant but distinct, cutting through the quiet of the forest like a blade. Liam froze, his ears straining to catch it again. A low, resonant hum, mechanical and unnatural, rising and falling in a rhythmic pattern. He rose from the armchair and moved to the window, careful not to disturb the fragile silence. The moonlit forest stretched out before him, serene and unbroken. But there, just above the treetops, a faint light flickered, red, then white, then gone. His stomach tightened. He had lived here long enough to know what didn't belong, and this was not normal. Behind him, a soft groan drew his attention back to the sofa. The woman was stirring, her face contorted in pain. Her eyes fluttered open, the alien glow in them dim but unmistakable. She looked at him, her gaze sharp and urgent despite her weakened state. "They're coming," she whispered, her voice rasping like dry leaves. Liam felt a cold weight settle in his chest. "Who's coming?" She struggled to sit up, wincing as she clutched her side. "Hunters," she said, the word heavy with meaning he couldn't yet grasp. "They track. They kill. They'll find me. And you." The gravity of her words hit him like a blow. His mind raced, a dozen questions vying for attention. Hunters? Killers? He had no idea what kind of conflict he had stumbled into, but it was clear he had become a part of it the moment he had stopped on that highway. "What do we do?" he asked, his voice steady despite the turmoil inside him. Her eyes locked onto his, and for a moment, the room seemed to hold its breath. "Run," she said simply. But Liam knew running wasn't an option. Not yet. The forest was vast, yes, but it offered little protection against whatever advanced technology her pursuers might have. No, the cabin was their best chance, at least for now. "Let's get you stable first," he said, moving to her side. "You won't make it far like this." She opened her mouth to argue, but stopped, her expression softening. She nodded reluctantly, her body sagging back against the sofa. Liam's mind worked quickly. The cabin was remote, shielded by thick woods and rolling hills, but it wasn't invincible. He needed to secure the perimeter, make it as defensible as possible. Grabbing his shotgun from its place above the fireplace, he loaded it with practiced efficiency. The weight of it in his hands was both reassuring and sobering, a reminder of just how real the danger had become. Outside, the hum grew louder, closer. The flickering light above the trees became more pronounced, casting eerie shadows that danced across the forest floor. He moved quickly, barricading the doors and windows with furniture and anything else he could find. His breath came in short, controlled bursts, his muscles taut with adrenaline. Inside, the woman watched him silently, her luminous eyes following his every movement. Despite her weakened state, there was a calmness about her, a quiet strength that hinted at a life far removed from anything Liam could imagine. "Why are they after you?" he asked as he worked, his voice low but insistent. She hesitated, her gaze dropping to the quilt wrapped around her. I broke an oath," she said finally. "I left my people, my cause. They see me as a traitor, and they do not forgive." Her words were measured, each one carrying the weight of a truth she wasn't ready to share in full. Liam didn't press her. Not yet. There would be time for that later, assuming they survived the night. The hum outside reached a crescendo, the ground trembling faintly beneath his feet. He glanced out the window and felt his stomach drop. A ship, sleek and predatory, hovered just above the treetops. Its surface was a mirror of the night sky, rippling like liquid metal. Searchlights cut through the darkness, sweeping across the forest with cold precision. "They found us," she said, her voice steady despite the fear in her eyes. Liam nodded, gripping the shotgun tightly. "Then we make them regret it." As the lights drew closer, illuminating the cabin in stark relief, Liam felt a strange clarity settle over him. He didn't know who these hunters were, or why they wanted her dead, but he knew one thing for certain. He wasn't going to let them take her, not without a fight. The air outside the cabin was charged, heavy with a presence Liam couldn't define but felt in his bones. The ship's rhythmic hum deepened, its vibrations resonating in the walls like an ominous heartbeat. The searchlights cut through the dense forest, their beams alive with urgency, slicing through the ancient trees that had stood for centuries as silent witnesses to the natural order. Now, that order was ruptured. Liam crouched by the window, his shotgun resting across his knee. His fingers traced its cold metal barrel absently as his eyes scanned the shadows. He knew his weapon was primitive against whatever was out there, but it was better than nothing. Behind him, Zira sat upright on the sofa, her glowing eyes narrowed, her breath steady but shallow. She was no longer the fragile figure he had carried into the cabin hours earlier. Though she was still weak, her posture exuded an alertness, a predator's poise, as if her body were waiting for the signal to strike. "They won't come through the door," she murmured, her voice cutting through the tense quiet. Liam turned his head slightly. "What do you mean?" "They'll test you first," she continued, her gaze distant as though recalling a memory she'd rather not revisit. "They don't waste resources. If they believe you're insignificant, they'll leave. If they believe you're dangerous—" Her voice trailed off, her meaning clear. The faintest rustle outside drew Liam's attention back to the window. His grip tightened on the shotgun as he leaned forward, peering into the thick darkness beyond the searchlight's reach. Something moved. At first, it was just a shape, tall, spindly, and fluid, like the shadows themselves had come alive. Then it emerged, stepping into the beam of light with a deliberate grace that sent a chill through Liam's spine. The creature was unlike anything he had imagined. Its form was vaguely humanoid, but its proportions were all wrong. Arms too long, legs jointed in ways that suggested a faster, more agile predator. Its skin was sleek and black, glistening like wet obsidian, and its face was a nightmare. an angular mask with slits for eyes that burned with an unnatural red light. "They've sent a scout," Zyra said, her tone grim. Liam's throat tightened. "Scout? That thing is just scouting?" Zyra didn't respond immediately. Her gaze was locked on the creature, her expression unreadable. "It's assessing," she said finally. "Determining how much of a threat you are. If you kill it, they'll know you're capable. If you don't—" She hesitated, then added, "They'll send worse." Liam's pulse quickened. He felt the weight of the moment pressing down on him, the decision coiling tightly in his chest. The creature moved closer, its head tilting unnaturally as it studied the cabin. Its motions were unnervingly quiet, its steps barely disturbing the forest floor. Then, without warning, it vanished into the shadows again. Liam's breath caught. "Where?" "Stay still," Zyra hissed, her voice low and urgent. The seconds stretched into eternity. Liam's senses were on fire, every nerve screaming at him to do something, anything. And then, a faint scraping sound. Above. He looked up, heart hammering. The roof. The realization hit him a second too late. A crash above sent dust and splinters raining down, and then the ceiling groaned as something heavy shifted across it. "They're testing," Zyra said, her voice sharper now. "Be ready." The next moments were a blur. The creature's descent was swift, a cascade of movement as it dropped from the roof and landed with predatory precision on the porch. The door shuddered under its weight, and then there was silence again. Liam rose slowly, the shotgun steady in his hands. He stepped toward the door, every muscle in his body coiled tight. He knew this was madness, facing a creature so clearly beyond his understanding, but the alternative was unthinkable. The silence stretched, taut as a wire. Then, a clawed hand pierced through the wood of the door, its black talons gleaming in the dim light. Liam fired. The blast was deafening, the recoil slamming into his shoulder as the shotgun's roar filled the cabin. The creature screamed, a sound that was more vibration than noise, something that shook the very air around them. It didn't retreat. Instead, the door splintered under its weight as it forced its way inside. Liam stumbled back, reloading on instinct, his heart pounding in his ears. Zyra was on her feet now, unsteady but determined. Her hands, glowing faintly, moved in strange, fluid patterns. Liam barely had time to register the movement before a pulse of energy shot from her palms, striking the creature square in the chest. The impact sent it reeling, its body slamming into the far wall with enough force to crack the wood. But it wasn't done. With a guttural snarl, it rose again, its eyes blazing brighter. "Enough!" Zyra's voice rang out, sharp and commanding. Her entire body seemed to glow now, the bioluminescence spreading across her skin in intricate, pulsing patterns. The sight was mesmerizing and terrifying. The creature hesitated, its movements faltering. For the first time, Liam saw something akin to fear in its posture. "Tell your masters," Zyra said, her voice steady despite the strain in her features. "I am not prey." The creature hesitated for a moment longer, then turned and bolted, disappearing into the night as swiftly as it had come. The silence that followed was deafening. Liam lowered the shotgun, his hands trembling as the adrenaline ebbed. Zyra sagged against the wall, her glow dimming. "It's only the beginning," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. Liam stared at her, his mind racing with questions he didn't know how to ask. One thing was clear. The world he thought he knew had just changed irrevocably. The cabin was eerily quiet, the aftermath of the night's chaos leaving a heavy tension in the air. The acrid scent of gunpowder mixed with the faint metallic tang of blood from Liam's scraped hands. Splintered wood lay scattered across the floor, and the door, barely hanging on its hinges, creaked ominously with the slightest breeze. Liam sat at the edge of the table, his fingers tapping a restless rhythm on its surface. His thoughts were a tangled web of questions he couldn't answer. Every instinct screamed for him to pack up and leave, to run far from whatever danger Zyra had dragged into his world, but leaving her didn't feel like an option anymore. Across the room, Zyra sat with her back against the wall, her face shadowed but her eyes luminous. They locked onto him occasionally, studying him, evaluating him, as though she were determining if he was still useful or expendable. "Are you going to tell me what that was?" Liam asked, breaking the silence. His voice was low, a mix of frustration and exhaustion. Zira tilted her head slightly, the movement too fluid to be entirely human. "It was a seeker," she said after a long pause. "A seeker of what? Me? You?" She closed her eyes, exhaling slowly. When she spoke again, her voice was softer. "A seeker of truth, or destruction. To them, it's the same thing." Liam frowned, the cryptic answer doing little to soothe his fraying nerves. "And what truth are they looking for?" Zira opened her eyes, her gaze piercing. "Me," she said simply. "And now you." The weight of her words settled heavily between them. Liam leaned back, running a hand through his hair. "Great," he muttered. "So I'm a target now, too." She didn't respond, but her silence spoke volumes. "Look," Liam said, his tone sharper now. "If I'm going to keep helping you, if I'm going to stay alive, I need to know what's going on. No more half-truths or cryptic nonsense. Start talking." Zira's expression shifted, a flicker of something, regret, pain, crossing her face. She pushed herself upright, wincing slightly as she moved. "My people," she began, her voice steady but tinged with weariness, "have lived in the shadows of this galaxy for millennia, hidden, watching. We were meant to observe, not interfere, but that changed." "Changed how?" Liam pressed. "Greed," Zira said bitterly. "Power. The leaders of my world saw humanity's potential, your resilience, your ingenuity, and decided they could use it, manipulate it. They began infiltrating your governments, your corporations, your very way of life." Liam's stomach churned. "And you? Where do you fit into all this?" "I was a scientist," she said, her voice softening. "A researcher. I studied human behavior, trying to understand what made you exceptional. But when I discovered what they were planning..." She trailed off, her gaze distant. "You ran," Liam guessed. Zira nodded. "I couldn't let them continue. The experiments, the manipulations, it was wrong. I stole what I could, data, evidence, and fled. But they won't let me go. Not when I know what I know." Liam let out a slow breath, the pieces of the puzzle beginning to click into place. "So that thing last night, it was sent by them?" "Yes," Zira said, "to retrieve me, or eliminate me. And now they know I'm involved," Liam said grimly. Zira's silence was all the confirmation he needed. He stood abruptly, pacing the length of the cabin. His mind raced, weighing his options, but every path seemed to lead to the same conclusion. There was no going back to his old life. Not now. "What do we do?" he asked finally, turning to face her. Zira hesitated, her expression unreadable. "You don't do anything. This isn't your fight." "Like hell it's not," Liam snapped. "They came to my home. They nearly killed us both. Whatever mess you're in, I'm already part of it." For a moment, Zira just stared at him. Then, slowly, a faint smile curved her lips, an expression that was equal parts gratitude and sadness. "Then we fight," she said. The hours that followed were a blur of preparation. Zira guided Liam through a crash course in alien survival, how to recognize and avoid certain tracking devices, the best ways to counteract their technology. She even showed him how to modify his primitive weapons, using scraps from her own equipment to enhance their power. As they worked, Liam couldn't help but notice the subtle changes in Zira, the way her movements became more fluid, more confident, as if she were regaining a part of herself she had lost. But there was something else, too, a vulnerability that lingered beneath her composed exterior. "Why are you helping me?" he asked at one point, his voice quiet. Zira paused, her hands stilling over the makeshift device she was assembling. "Because you helped me first," she said simply. "That's it?" She looked up at him, her glowing eyes meeting his. "Because I see something in you, Liam. Something they fear. And maybe something I can trust." Her words left him momentarily speechless. Night fell again, and with it came the return of the oppressive silence. But this time, it was different. This time, they were ready. The first sign of trouble came just past midnight, a low, thrumming sound that vibrated through the ground, growing louder with each passing second. "They're coming," Zira said, her voice calm but firm. Liam gripped his shotgun, his heart pounding. "What's the plan?" Zira's expression hardened. "We hold our ground." The attack was swift and relentless. This time, it wasn't just one seeker. It was an entire squad, their black forms weaving through the trees like shadows come to life. But Liam and Zira fought with a desperation born of survival. Zira's energy pulses lit up the night, striking down the attackers with deadly precision. Liam's modified shotgun roared, each shot ripping through the air with devastating force. For every enemy they took down, another seemed to emerge from the darkness. But they didn't back down. As the battle raged on, Liam felt a strange sense of clarity, a realization that for the first time in his life, he was fighting for something bigger than himself, and he wasn't alone. When the final seeker fell, silence reclaimed the forest once more. Liam and Zira stood side by side, battered but unbroken. "It's not over," Zira said, her voice heavy with exhaustion. Liam nodded. "Then we'll be ready." As dawn broke on the horizon, a fragile hope began to take root in the ruins of their world. But Liam knew the real fight was only just beginning. The morning light was pale and fleeting, its rays threading through the forest canopy in spectral streaks. Liam leaned against the cabin's fractured doorframe, his muscles stiff from the night's battle. A faint breeze carried the acrid scent of burnt foliage and scorched metal, the remnants of their struggle against the Seekers. Behind him, Zira moved with a quiet precision, packing the last of their meager supplies into a sleek, alien device that shimmered faintly with an inner light. Her face was calm but pale, her exhaustion betraying the toll of the fight. "It's not safe here anymore," she said without looking up. "It was never safe," Liam replied, his voice laced with dry humor. "But I get your point." Zira paused, her hands resting on the device. "You still have time to walk away," she said softly. "They'll keep hunting me, but you could disappear." Liam turned to face her, his eyes steady. "And let you take on an entire empire by yourself? I think I'll pass." Her lips quirked in the faintest hint of a smile, but the moment was fleeting. She straightened, her expression hardening as she adjusted the device's settings. "The coordinates are set," she said. "Once we reach the uplink, we'll broadcast the evidence." "And what happens after that?" Liam asked, though he wasn't sure he wanted the answer. Zira's gaze flickered toward him, a shadow passing through her luminous eyes. "After that they'll come, all of them." The weight of her words hung heavily in the air. Liam exhaled slowly, gripping his modified shotgun as if it could somehow anchor him against the tide of uncertainty. "Then we'd better make sure they're ready for what's coming," he said. The uplink station was buried deep within the forest, hidden beneath layers of overgrowth and camouflaged by centuries of neglect. As Liam and Zira approached, the structure loomed like a forgotten sentinel, its sleek, alien architecture marred by time, but still radiating an otherworldly energy. Zira led the way, her movements purposeful but cautious. Liam followed closely, scanning the surrounding shadows for any sign of danger. The forest seemed unnaturally still, as though holding its breath in anticipation of what was to come. Inside the station, the air was cool and stale. The walls hummed faintly with a residual power that prickled at Liam's skin. Zira moved to the central console, her fingers dancing over the controls with practiced ease. This uplink connects to every major communications network in the galaxy, she explained. Once the data is transmitted, the truth will spread faster than they can contain it. And they'll come for us, Liam said grimly. Zira didn't deny it. Instead, she handed him a small glowing disk, the data core containing the stolen evidence. This is the key, she said. If anything happens to me, you need to make sure it gets uploaded. Liam hesitated, the weight of her words sinking in. Nothing's going to happen to you, he said firmly. Zira met his gaze, a flicker of vulnerability breaking through her stoic facade. Liam, before she could finish, the station's alarms blared, a shrill, piercing sound that echoed through the chamber like a warning bell. They found us, Zira said, her voice tight. Liam's grip tightened on his weapon. Then let's give them a warm welcome. The first wave hit hard. Black-clad enforcers descended on the station like a storm, their movements swift and coordinated. Liam and Zira fought side by side, their strikes precise and relentless. Energy pulses lit up the dim chamber, and the air was thick with the acrid smell of burning circuitry and charred armor. Liam's shotgun roared, each blast a visceral reminder of his determination. Zira moved like a shadow, her alien grace a stark contrast to the chaos around them. But for every enforcer they took down, more poured in, their numbers seemingly endless. "We're running out of time," Zira shouted over the din. Liam turned to see her pinned near the console, her energy weapon glowing dimly as its power reserves dwindled. He fought his way to her side, his heart pounding. "Go!" he yelled, shoving the data core into her hands. "I'll hold them off." Zira's eyes widened. "No, you won't survive. Neither of us will if you don't finish this," Liam interrupted. For a moment, she hesitated, torn between logic and emotion. Then, with a reluctant nod, she turned and sprinted toward the uplink. Liam held his ground, his shotgun blazing as he fought to buy her time. The enforcers closed in, their weapons cutting through the air with deadly precision, but he didn't falter, not until he heard the hum of the uplink's activation. Just the chamber was bathed in a brilliant light as the uplink's transmission reached its peak. Zira stood at the console, her face illuminated by the glow of the screen. She pressed the final command, and the data core's contents surged into the network. "It's done!" she called out. Liam staggered back toward her, his body battered and his ammunition nearly depleted. "Then let's get out of here," he said, his voice ragged. But before they could move, the room trembled violently. A deafening roar filled the air as an enormous ship descended from the sky, its silhouette blocking out the sunlight. "They're here," Zira said, her voice barely audible. Liam glanced at her, his expression grim. "And so is the truth." Zira turned to him, her eyes shining with a mixture of determination and sorrow. "Thank you," she said quietly. "For what?" Liam asked, his brow furrowing. "For believing in me," she said. Before he could respond, a blinding light enveloped them both, and the world dissolved into chaos. And when the dust finally settled, the uplink station was in ruins, its once sleek architecture reduced to rubble. But the transmission had been successful. Across the galaxy, the truth spread like wildfire, igniting a movement that could not be silenced. Liam awoke to find himself lying beneath a canopy of stars, his body aching but alive. Beside him, Zira sat quietly, her gaze fixed on the horizon. "It's over," she said softly. "For now," Liam replied. She turned to him, a faint smile tugging at her lips. "The galaxy owes you a debt it can never repay." Liam shook his head. "I didn't do it for the galaxy," he said. "I did it for you." Zira's expression softened, and for the first time, she let her guard down completely. As the stars continued to shimmer above them, they sat in silence, the weight of their journey finally lifting. The fight wasn't over, but for the first time there was hope, a fragile but undeniable hope for a better future. And together, they would face whatever came next. The air inside the detention camp was heavy, dense with the acrid tang of recycled oxygen and the faint hum of power conduits running through its skeletal structure. To Luke, it felt less like air and more like a presence, something alive and watchful, pressing against his lungs as he crouched in the shadow of a loading bay. The low, rhythmic thrum of alien machinery pulsed through the walls, a reminder that he was deep inside enemy territory, far beyond the reach of rescue or reprieve. This was the heart of the regime's power, a sprawling labyrinth of containment fields and impenetrable security systems. On the surface, it was a prison for war captives, the kind of place whispered about in the resistance, its existence denied by the enemy. But Luke had heard the rumors. The people who disappeared into this camp were never seen again, their fates unknown, their stories silenced. It was a place meant to crush hope. The visor of his stolen uniform cast a faint emerald glow over the interior of the maintenance alcove where he hid. It had been calibrated to his neural signature back at the resistance base, a precarious modification that allowed him to bypass some of the camp's automated defenses. But the disguise was far from perfect. The tiniest error, a gesture, a delay, even the way he breathed, could trigger suspicion. And suspicion, in this place, was a death sentence. His earpiece crackled faintly, a ghost of a signal from the resistance that didn't dare extend its reach too far. The voice on the other end, Reed, his handler, had been silent for hours now. Radio silence. Reed had warned before Luke infiltrated the perimeter. You're on your own once you're inside. Get what you need, and get out. What he needed was information. A map of the enemy's infrastructure, their troop deployments, the locations of their weapons caches. What he hadn't expected to find was her. The faintest movement caught his eye, a shadow shifting against the stark, sterile light spilling from the corridor beyond the alcove. Luke froze, his hand tightening around the grip of the alien stun baton he'd lifted off a guard during his infiltration. The shape moved again, stepping closer, and then he saw them. Eyes like molten gold, burning with intensity, even in the dim light. Lower your weapon, a voice said, soft but commanding. Luke didn't move. The voice was melodic, almost hypnotic, with a cadence that was both alien and unnervingly human. The figure stepped fully into the light, revealing a tall, lithe form with skin that shimmered faintly like polished amethyst. Her hair, if it could be called that, flowed like liquid silver, catching and refracting the light in subtle waves. She wore a tattered uniform, its intricate patterns suggesting a history Luke couldn't begin to unravel. I won't hurt you, she said, holding her hands up in a gesture of surrender. Not unless you force me to. Luke's mind raced. She was clearly a prisoner, but she didn't carry herself like one. There was a sharpness in her gaze, a predator's awareness that belied the vulnerability of her appearance. Who are you? He demanded, keeping his voice low. That depends, she said, tilting her head slightly. Are you here to help me or to kill me? The question hit him like a punch to the gut. He hadn't been prepared for this, for her. He had trained for guards, patrol drones, the cold efficiency of an alien war machine. Not for this. Answer the question, he said, his grip on the baton tightening. The corner of her mouth quirked upward, a faint, sardonic smile. You don't belong here, human. That much is obvious. And neither do I. But perhaps, together, we can change that. He didn't lower his weapon. You still haven't answered me. Her smile faded, replaced by a flicker of something more somber. My name is Zarya, she said, her voice softening. And if you don't help me escape, you'll never make it out of this place alive. Luke's breath caught. The way she said it wasn't a threat. It was a certainty, delivered with quiet conviction. How do you know that? He asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Because, she said, stepping closer, this camp is more than just a prison. It's a weapon. And if you don't trust me, you'll never understand what's at stake until it's too late. Her words were like pieces of a puzzle, fragments of a picture he couldn't yet see. But there was no time to analyze them. The faint echo of boots on metal grates reached his ears, growing louder with every passing second. "They're coming," Zarya said, her voice urgent now. "You have a choice to make, human. Help me, or die here." Luke hesitated, every instinct screaming at him to walk away, to stick to the mission, to leave her behind. But something in her eyes stopped him, a fire, a defiance that felt almost familiar. Against his better judgment, he reached out and grabbed her hand. "Follow me," he said. Zarya didn't smile, didn't speak. She just nodded, her grip firm and steady as they plunged deeper into the shadows, the thrum of alien machinery echoing in their wake. And as they ran, Luke couldn't shake the feeling that he had just made a decision that would change everything. Not just for him, but for the world he had vowed to protect. The corridors of the detention camp seemed endless, a maze of gleaming metal and pulsing energy conduits that radiated a faint, otherworldly hum. Luke moved with measured precision, each step calculated to avoid the slightest echo that might betray their presence. Behind him, Zarya followed silently, her lithe frame almost blending into the dim, sterile light that illuminated their path. The heat of her hand lingered on his, even though they had long since let go. That fleeting connection, so unexpected, so alien, had unsettled him in ways he couldn't fully articulate. "What is this place, really?" he whispered, his voice barely audible over the distant hum of machinery. Zarya hesitated, her molten gold eyes scanning their surroundings. "It's not just a prison," she said finally. "It's a hub, a nerve center for their operations. They don't just hold people here, they strip them of everything that makes them who they are. Minds, memories, resistance." Luke frowned, his grip tightening on the alien baton he still carried. "You're saying they brainwash them?" "It's worse than that," Zarya replied, her voice laced with something close to grief. "They erase them. What's left isn't a person. It's a shell, a tool, loyal to their regime and nothing else." Her words hung heavy in the air, thick with implications Luke wasn't ready to confront. He had heard whispers of such atrocities in resistance briefings, but hearing them confirmed by someone who had seen it firsthand. "Why are you here?" he asked, his voice sharper than he intended. "Why would they lock up one of their own?" Zarya's jaw tightened, her gaze fixed ahead. "Because I refused to become what they wanted me to be." It was an answer, but not the one he wanted. Luke knew better than to press further, though. Trust was a fragile thing, and whatever bond they had formed was still too tenuous to bear the weight of his questions. The sound of distant footsteps snapped his attention back to the present. Zarya's ears twitched slightly, her body tensing as she glanced over her shoulder. "They're closing in," she murmured. "We need to move." Luke nodded, his mind racing as he tried to piece together a plan. The camp's layout was a labyrinth, and while Zarya seemed to know her way around, they were still at a severe disadvantage. Every step they took deeper into the facility only increased the risk of discovery. As they turned a corner, Luke's visor flickered, the stolen uniform's interface struggling to maintain its connection to the camp's network. He cursed under his breath, slapping the side of the helmet in frustration. "Problem?" Zarya asked, arching a silver eyebrow. "Just a glitch," he muttered. "It'll hold." But even as he said it, he wasn't sure he believed it. They slipped into what appeared to be a storage bay, the walls lined with cylindrical pods that glowed faintly from within. Luke approached one cautiously, his breath hitching as he saw the figure suspended inside, a human, their face slack and expressionless, as if in a dreamless sleep. What is this?" he asked, his voice trembling. "Harvesting," Zarya said quietly, her tone devoid of emotion. "They take what they need, skills, knowledge, memories, and discard the rest. These people are resources to them." Luke recoiled, bile rising in his throat. He had known the regime was ruthless, but this was something else entirely. "We can't leave them here," he said, his voice firm despite the unease churning in his gut. Zarya placed a hand on his arm, stopping him. If we try to free them now, we'll be caught, she said. And if we're caught, no one will ever know what's happening here. Her logic was cold, but it was undeniable. Luke clenched his fists, anger and helplessness warring within him. Then why bring me here? He demanded. To show you what's at stake, Zarya replied, her gaze unwavering. If we fail, this is what awaits your people. The next stretch of their journey was a blur of narrow escapes and whispered directions. Each turn seemed to bring them closer to the edge of disaster, the sound of patrols growing louder, more frequent. At one point, they ducked into an alcove as a trio of guards passed by, their heavy boots echoing ominously. Luke held his breath, his heart pounding in his chest as he gripped the baton tightly. Zarya stood perfectly still beside him, her expression calm but her eyes sharp, calculating. Once the guards were gone, she turned to him. You're tense, she observed. No kidding, he muttered. It'll get you killed, she said bluntly. Luke shot her a glare. Thanks for the advice, he said, his tone dripping with sarcasm. Zarya's lips twitched in what might have been the faintest hint of a smile. You're not like the others I've met, she said, almost to herself. Luke didn't have time to ask what she meant before she motioned for him to follow her. They finally reached a junction where the corridors split off in 3 directions. Zarya paused, her head tilted slightly as if listening for something. This way, she said, gesturing to the left. How do you know? Luke asked, his skepticism evident. Because I've been here before, she replied. The weight of her words struck him. He had assumed her knowledge of the camp came from observation or intelligence, but the way she moved, the confidence in her decisions. She wasn't just familiar with this place, she was intimately connected to it. Zarya, he said carefully, what aren't you telling me? She turned to face him, her expression unreadable. I told you before, I was one of them. That means I know their systems, their tactics, and it means I know what they'll do if they catch us. Her admission only deepened the chasm of questions in Luke's mind. Who was she really, and why had she chosen to turn against her own kind? But before he could press her further, the sound of an alarm shattered the fragile silence. They've found us, Zarya said, her voice steady but urgent. Run. Without waiting for a response, she took off down the corridor, and Luke had no choice but to follow, the questions in his mind drowned out by the pounding of his heart and the echo of their footsteps in the shadows. The wail of the alarm echoed through the metallic corridors, a rising crescendo that seemed to amplify the suffocating tension of the camp. Luke's breath came in ragged gasps as he sprinted after Zarya, the stolen uniform's boots hammering against the grated floor. The world around him was a blur of motion and sound, but his focus remained on her, her silvery form weaving through the maze of halls with an ease that defied their urgency. Where are we going? He shouted over the clamor, his voice edged with desperation. Somewhere they won't find us, she replied without looking back. Luke's legs burned with the effort of keeping up, his mind racing just as fast. He had always known this mission was a long shot, but the reality of their predicament was sinking in now, heavier with each passing second. A sudden hiss of pneumatic doors opening ahead brought him to an abrupt halt. Zarya had stopped too, her body tense as she stared into the gaping maw of the doorway. Beyond it was darkness, a void that seemed to swallow the sterile light of the corridor behind them. What is this place? Luke asked, his voice low despite the pounding of his heart. Storage, Zarya said, stepping forward, but not for supplies. The moment she crossed the threshold, the lights flickered on, revealing a cavernous chamber filled with towering cylinders. Each one was transparent, its interior bathed in an eerie green glow. Suspended within were figures, human and alien alike, encased in some kind of viscous liquid. Their faces were serene, as if they were merely sleeping, but the sight sent a chill down Luke's spine. What the hell is this? he demanded, his voice trembling with equal parts horror and anger. "This is where they keep them," Zarya said softly, her molten gold eyes scanning the rows of pods. "The ones they've taken, the ones they're still harvesting." Luke stepped closer to one of the cylinders, his stomach churning as he recognized the face inside. It was a young woman, her dark hair floating around her like a halo. He didn't know her, but the sight of her, so vulnerable, so utterly powerless, ignited a spark of rage deep within him. "We have to stop this," he said, his voice tight. Zarya turned to him, her expression unreadable. "And how do you propose we do that?" "I don't know," Luke admitted, his fists clenched at his sides, "but we can't just leave them here." For a moment, Zarya said nothing, her gaze locked on his. Then, with a sigh, she stepped past him and placed a hand on one of the cylinders. The light within flickered, and a holographic interface appeared, its alien symbols shifting and flowing like liquid. "They're in stasis," she said, her fingers moving deftly over the controls. "If we try to release them now, they'll die." Luke's frustration boiled over. "So, what? We just walk away? Pretend we didn't see this?" "No," Zarya said sharply, her voice cutting through his anger like a blade. "But we can't help them if we're caught. And if we don't stop what's happening here, there will be more, so many more." Her words hit him like a punch to the gut. She was right, of course. As much as he hated it, she was right. Before he could respond, a loud clang echoed through the chamber, followed by the unmistakable sound of boots on metal. "They've found us," Zarya said, her voice tight. Luke's grip on the alien baton tightened as the doors at the far end of the room slid open, revealing a squad of guards armed with sleek, menacing weapons. "Move!" Zarya shouted, grabbing his arm and pulling him toward a side passage he hadn't noticed before. They sprinted through the narrow corridor, the sound of pursuit growing louder behind them. Luke's mind was a whirlwind of fear and adrenaline, but through it all one thought stood out. They couldn't keep running forever. The passage led them to a control room, its walls lined with glowing panels and monitors displaying various parts of the camp. Zarya moved quickly, her fingers dancing over the controls as she began typing commands in her alien language. "What are you doing?" Luke asked, his voice strained. "Creating a distraction," she replied without looking at him. Moments later, the alarms changed, their tone shifting to a low, rhythmic pulse. The lights in the room flickered, and several of the monitors went dark. "That should buy us some time," Zarya said, turning to face him. Luke wasn't sure whether to feel relieved or more terrified. "You seem awfully familiar with their systems," he said, his tone cautious. Zarya's gaze hardened. "I told you, I used to be one of them." "And now you're not?" Her eyes flared with anger. "Do you think this is easy for me, betraying my own kind, risking everything to help you?" Luke stepped back, taken aback by the intensity of her outburst. For a moment, the two of them stared at each other, the tension in the room thick enough to cut with a knife. Finally, Zarya broke the silence. "I made my choice," she said quietly, "and I'll live with it. But if you're going to doubt me every step of the way, then maybe you should make yours." Luke's jaw tightened. He wanted to trust her, needed to trust her, but the questions gnawed at him like a persistent itch. Who was she really? And why had she turned against her people? Before he could respond, one of the monitors flickered back to life, displaying an image that sent a chill down his spine. It was a map of the camp, but what caught his attention was the blinking red dot labeled intruders. "They're tracking us," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. Zarya's expression darkened. "Then we need to keep moving." But as they turned to leave, another monitor lit up, displaying a figure Luke hadn't seen before. It was humanoid, but its features were sharp, angular, and unnervingly symmetrical. Its eyes, black voids filled with pinpricks of white light, seemed to pierce through the screen, as if it could see them. "Zarya," the figure said, its voice smooth and chilling. "You can't run forever." Luke felt the blood drain from his face as he turned to Zarya. "Who is that?" She didn't answer. "Zarya," the figure said again, its tone almost amused. "Come home. We can still make this right." Zarya's hands clenched into fists, her molten gold eyes blazing with fury. "Run," she whispered to Luke, her voice trembling with barely restrained emotion. "What?" "Run!" she shouted, shoving him toward the door. But as they fled into the shadows, Luke couldn't shake the feeling that the real danger wasn't behind them. It was beside him, wearing a face he was only beginning to understand. The silence between them was deafening, punctuated only by the distant thrum of the camp's systems and the faint hiss of recycled air through the vents. Luke followed Zarya down another winding corridor, his mind a whirlwind of confusion and doubt. She hadn't said a word since they'd fled the control room, her every step purposeful, her every movement taut with controlled anger. He couldn't let the silence linger any longer. "Who was that?" he asked, his voice low but insistent. Zarya didn't slow her pace. "Not here," she replied curtly. "Then when?" he pressed, quickening his stride to match hers. "Because if we're walking into some kind of trap, I'd like to know now." That stopped her. She turned abruptly, her molten gold eyes burning into his. "You think I'm leading you into a trap?" "I don't know what to think," Luke snapped, his frustration bubbling over. "You keep telling me to trust you, but every time I start to, something else comes up. First, it's this camp, then it's the stasis chambers, and now there's this thing that seems to know you better than I do." For a moment, Zarya just stared at him, her expression unreadable. Then she sighed, the tension in her shoulders easing slightly. "His name is Krethos," she said, her voice quieter now. He was my mentor, the one who trained me when I was still part of the regime." Luke frowned, the weight of her words sinking in. "So, he's the reason you're so familiar with all of this?" "Yes," Zarya admitted. "He taught me everything. How to fight, how to infiltrate, how to become what they wanted me to be." "And what was that?" Luke asked, though part of him wasn't sure he wanted to know the answer. Zarya hesitated, her gaze dropping to the floor. "An enforcer," she said finally. "A weapon. Someone who could root out dissent, eliminate threats, and ensure the regime's control remained absolute." The admission hung in the air like a thundercloud, heavy and electric. Luke took a step back, his mind racing as he tried to reconcile the person standing before him with the image her words painted. "But you're not that anymore," he said, his voice softening. "No," Zarya said, her gaze snapping back to his. "But that doesn't mean I'm free of it. Krethos wants me back because I know too much. To him, I'm either an asset or a liability, and liabilities don't live long in the regime." Their conversation was cut short by the sound of approaching footsteps, and Zarya motioned for Luke to follow her into a small maintenance alcove. They pressed themselves against the cold metal walls, their breaths shallow as the patrol passed by. Once the danger had passed, Zarya turned to Luke, her expression grave. "We're running out of time," she said. "Krethos won't stop hunting us, and if we don't find a way out of this camp soon, he'll win." Luke nodded, his determination hardening. "Then let's finish this." They made their way to what Zarya called the core of the camp, a massive chamber filled with towering machines and glowing conduits that pulsed with an almost organic rhythm. "This is it," Zarya said, her voice barely above a whisper. "The nerve center. Everything they do here, every system, every operation, it all runs through this place." Luke's eyes widened as he took in the sight. "So if we take it out, we cripple them," Zarya finished. "But there's no way they don't have this place heavily guarded," Luke said, his mind already running through possible scenarios. "They do," Zarya confirmed, "and that's why we need to split up." "What?" Luke turned to her, his brow furrowing. "No way. If we split up, we're just making it easier for them to pick us off. It's the only way, Zarya insisted. You need to get to the main terminal and upload this. She held out a small device, its surface etched with alien symbols. It's a virus. It'll take down their systems long enough for us to escape. And what about you? Luke asked, his voice laced with suspicion. I'll create a distraction, Zarya said. Draw their attention away from you so you can get to the terminal. Luke hesitated, his instinct screaming at him that something wasn't right. But he also knew she was right. They didn't have another option. Fine, he said, taking the device. But if this goes sideways... It won't, Zarya said, cutting him off. Just trust me, Luke. The plan went into motion almost immediately. Zarya disappeared into the shadows, her movements as fluid and silent as a predator stalking its prey. Luke, meanwhile, made his way toward the terminal, his stolen uniform and helmet doing little to calm the storm of nerves roiling inside him. As he approached the terminal, he heard the first sounds of Zarya's distraction, explosions echoing through the chamber, followed by the shouts of guards scrambling to respond. He reached the terminal and quickly connected the device, his hands trembling as he worked. The interface flared to life, its alien symbols shifting into something he could barely understand. Hurry up, he muttered to himself, his fingers flying over the controls. The process seemed to take an eternity, but finally the device emitted a faint chime, signaling that the upload was complete. Zarya, it's done, he said into his communicator. There was no response. Zarya? He tried again, his voice tinged with panic. Still nothing. He found her in one of the side chambers, slumped against a wall, her breath shallow and uneven. Blood, an iridescent violet, pooled beneath her, staining the metallic floor. Zarya! Luke rushed to her side, his heart pounding. She looked up at him, her golden eyes dimmer than before. Did you do it? She asked, her voice weak. Yeah, Luke said, his voice breaking. Yeah, I did. But you're gonna be okay. We're gonna get you out of here. Zarya managed a faint smile. You're a terrible liar, she said. Luke shook his head, his hands pressing against her wounds in a desperate attempt to stop the bleeding. Don't do this, Zarya. Don't you dare give up on me. Her hand reached up, weak but insistent, and grasped his. You have to go, she said. Finish what we started. I'm not leaving you, Luke said firmly. You don't have a choice, Zarya said, her voice growing fainter. Krethos, he won't stop. You have to stop him, Luke. Promise me. Tears streamed down Luke's face as he nodded. I promise, he said, his voice barely audible. Zarya's grip on his hand tightened briefly, then went slack. For a moment Luke just sat there, holding her hand, his mind numb with grief. Then slowly, he rose to his feet, his resolve hardening. The fight wasn't over. Not yet. The camp lay in ruins behind him, its towering structures collapsing under the weight of the chaos he and Zarya had unleashed. Luke didn't turn back to watch the fires climb higher into the polluted sky, or the swarming of desperate guards trying to regain control. His focus was ahead, on the wasteland stretching before him, and the small, sleek craft Zarya had secured as their escape plan, before the plan had unraveled in blood and sacrifice. The virus had worked, the systems were down, and the camp's central operations were crippled. But Krethos was still alive. Luke could feel it, like a shadow trailing his every step, waiting for the moment to strike. He reached the craft, his breath coming in ragged gasps as he climbed inside. The cockpit was cramped, designed for a single occupant, but the controls were familiar enough. As the engines hummed to life, he couldn't help but glance at the empty seat beside him. Zarya, he whispered, his voice cracking. Her absence was a hollow ache, but there was no time to mourn. Not yet. He gripped the controls and launched the craft into the air, the wasteland shrinking below him as he ascended into the dense, ash-filled atmosphere. The communicator crackled to life as he cleared the first layer of orbital defenses, Krethos' voice cutting through the static like a blade. You're persistent, human, he said, his tone calm and almost amused. but you're not leaving this system alive." Luke's jaw tightened, his hands steady on the controls. "You've already lost, Krethos," he replied. "The camp is gone, your prisoners are free, and your secrets are exposed. You can't win this." Krethos chuckled, a sound that sent a shiver down Luke's spine. "Do you think this was about a single camp? A few prisoners? You've done nothing but delay the inevitable." The radar lit up with warning signals as Krethos's ship appeared behind him, a sleek predatory vessel bristling with weaponry. Luke's instincts screamed at him to flee, but he knew there was no outrunning Krethos in this ship. "You want me?" he said, his voice steady despite the fear clawing at his chest. "Come and get me." The first volley of plasma bolts narrowly missed him, lighting up the void in flashes of blue and white. Luke jerked the controls, the ship lurching to the side as he dove toward the remains of an abandoned orbital station. The debris field was dense, its jagged edges a treacherous maze, but it was his best chance at surviving Krethos's assault. As he weaved through the wreckage, memories of Zarya flooded his mind. Her voice, her strength, the way she had looked at him in those final moments. She had trusted him to finish what they started, to honor her sacrifice. He wouldn't let her down. In the station's crumbling corridors became his battleground, as he lured Krethos deeper into its labyrinthine depths. The larger ship struggled to maneuver in the confined spaces, giving Luke a fleeting advantage. He darted through narrow passages and hidden alcoves, his mind racing as he formulated a plan. He couldn't beat Krethos in a direct fight, but he didn't need to. "Zarya," he murmured, his fingers brushing against the device she had given him, the one that had brought the camp to its knees. A smile tugged at the corners of his mouth as an idea began to take shape. Krethos's voice crackled through the communicator again, sharp with frustration. "You can't hide forever, human. You're only prolonging the inevitable." Luke didn't respond. Instead, he guided his ship toward the station's reactor core, the faint glow of its unstable energy bathing the surrounding metal in an otherworldly light. He activated the device, its interface springing to life with a series of alien symbols. It wasn't designed for this, but Zarya had taught him enough to make it work. As the countdown began, he sent one final message to Krethos. "Checkmate," he said, his voice calm. The reactor core erupted in a blinding explosion, its energy tearing through the station and everything within it. Luke's ship shot out of the debris field just ahead of the blast, the shockwave propelling him into open space. For a moment, he thought he might have escaped unscathed. But then the warning lights on his console began to flash, and the ship's systems sputtered in protest. He was losing power. The escape pod was cramped and barely functional, but it was his only option. As he ejected from the ship, he watched its burning wreckage drift away, a bittersweet mix of relief and sorrow washing over him. He had won. But at what cost? The days passed in the cold silence of space, the pod's life support systems keeping him alive but barely. He drifted aimlessly, his thoughts a constant loop of what had happened and what might come next. When a rescue beacon finally appeared on his radar, he felt a surge of hope tempered by exhaustion. The ship that approached was human, its design unmistakably earthen. As he was pulled aboard, the crew greeted him with cautious curiosity, their expressions a mix of relief and suspicion. "Who are you?" one of them asked, a woman with sharp eyes and a commanding presence. "Luke," he said simply, his voice hoarse, "resistance operative." The woman's gaze softened slightly. "You've been through hell," she said. "Yeah," Luke replied, his thoughts drifting to Zarya. "But it was worth it." In the weeks that followed, Luke debriefed the resistance on everything he had seen and done. The information he provided was invaluable, a turning point in humanity's fight against the regime. But even as he became a hero among his peers, Luke couldn't shake the weight of what he had lost. Zarya's face haunted his dreams, her voice a constant echo in his mind. One night, As he stood on the observation deck of the Resistance's flagship, staring out at the endless expanse of stars, he felt a strange sense of peace. She was gone, but her sacrifice had not been in vain, and as long as he lived, he would carry her memory with him, a beacon of hope in the darkest of times.